Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are all well, and thanks a million for joining us. We'll have people joining, I'm sure, for the next couple of minutes, but we'll kick off. Delighted to be here again. A month on. Hard to believe it's the end of September. And Richard, certainly felt like this morning I went for a walk around the park, as is my want, and my hands were cold, and I was thinking about maybe getting the old gloves out of the wardrobe. So it feels.
Are you going to buy me some then, Mick, out of expenses, or do I have to go through the winter cold again?
I'll give you a loan of mine if you want, no problem.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely feels like the last few days a real noticeable shift into autumn winterland, right?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's last week was a nice bonus. It was t-shirt weather, and this morning I started off with 3 layers on. The hat's come off since then, but it's momentous day really. It's the annual bobble hat day when my woolly hat comes out, replaces my sun hat.
Very good. That's exciting news for everyone. Breaking news on the webinar.
Well, it's as exciting as it gets for a gardener, really. But there we go.
So today we're going to be talking about harvesting tips and techniques, and our veg of the month are the courgette, squashes, and pumpkins. So we'll focus on some of that as well. But I suppose before we get into that, Richard, how has September been in the gardens, HQ and Curramore?
Surprisingly easy. It was a very dry month and quite a warm month as well. People, non-gardeners, are moaning a bit about the summer not really happening, but I judge a summer by the squashes, which is what we're talking about today. Last year, with the cold, wet July, August, our yield of squashes was absolute rubbish, to be honest. It was dreadful yield. This summer, it's okay. We have some lovely squash now going into the shop and the boxes from next week. And the kitchen, obviously, a pretty good yield, and they're ripening. It's also great for preparing seed beds for the green manures and so on. But though I had to wait until the end of last week to sow things like the Landsberger mixed green manure over the winter, because there wasn't enough moisture in the soil. So sowed it in dry soil for the rain to come last weekend. So yeah, it's been quite a benign end to the year for me. No complaints.
Yeah, that bit of sun last week was brilliant for tomatoes. I found at home in the tunnel. They feels like that might have extended tomato season a little bit. Would that be a fair comment?
Very much so. It's the dry, I think, because I extend my harvest of tomatoes by stopping watering pretty much the beginning of September.
Yeah.
Strip leaves off, stop watering. But I didn't need to shut the tunnels up completely until the end of the hot spell last week. Now the doors are shut. But once the doors are shut, if there's any moisture in the ground, they do tend to rot with botrytis and so on, the furry grey mold. So you'll always get a bit of that. But I keep it dry, keep the doors shut, and I'll be happily taking tomatoes off to the end of next month. But the quality deteriorates a bit, but chef can do his stuff with them and turn them into something tasty. Yeah. So yeah, they're cropping away. And last week gave us a mini glut, which is going in the boxes tomorrow, I think.
Yeah. So just so we're clear on that, do you mean that the doors are shut all day and all night, or just at night?
Yeah, all day, all night.
Oh wow. Okay. And like, there's no ventilation happening at all? You're not opening them up for a few hours each day or anything?
I'm not. That's why I want it very dry.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
But you have to take the leaves off to be able to leave them with no moisture in the soil.
And what about then, if like most back garden growers, I guess, if they have a polytunnel, they probably have a mix of things in the tunnel, so not watering becomes a bit more challenging, I guess, if you've got more than just
you have to pick what you're going for. Although tomatoes are the last of the summer crops. I picked, I think, 1 aubergine yesterday from my patch, a small bucket of peppers. Everything's cleared out now. A few chilies left in there, which I'll harvest shortly. But cucumbers are all but finished. So all the other crops are finished, so we can stop watering them as well. I bizarrely did a bit of an experiment not watering cucumbers in the tunnel, and much to my amazement, they've gone 3 weeks without water, just at the very tail end of the crop. We have lots of Curramore without too much harm. I would not have predicted that at all. So I would suggest, unless you have salad crops in the tunnel, don't bother watering anything.
At all, like not even once a week or once fortnight, right?
No, I mean, that's hot off the press, having experimented with my cucumbers at the end of the year there. So
yeah, because you would think like cucumbers, a cucumber is mainly water, you know. So
oh
like
yeah, I keep them well watered and keep the leaves misted to some extent to control red spider and powdery mildew in the summer. But no, just a little experiment. They didn't seem to mind it much at all, really.
Yeah, brilliant.
I'm not saying if you have a tunnel just of cucumbers, certainly you would keep watering them. This was just me experimenting on a small bed to see what happened.
Yeah. So from a kind of harvesting perspective, I always find this time of the year, like when you're still harvesting the summer crops like tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers, and then, you know, you're starting to, like, we had our first kind of veggie stew at home during the week. Like, so you're starting to feel like, you know, dipping into the stock pot vegetables like, you know, the carrots and the leeks and celery and those kind of things as well. So in some ways, it's kind of peak harvest territory, right? Even though it's
very much so, yeah.
Quite late in the year.
The season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, as somebody said. Yeah, it is. You've got, as you say, the end of the summer crops and the beginning of the autumn ones. It's an easy time to be a gardener because you're not doing any growing, you're just harvesting. So it's a question, I suppose, of what we're talking about today, of how you manage that harvest, what needs to be left in the ground, what needs to be pulled out, and when, really.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a great segue into that very topic. So how do we...
I'm getting more professional at this, am I then, Mick?
You are, actually. The flow is really good today, Richard. Well done,
it's
you.
Monkeys and typewriter stuff, you know.
So talk to us then about exactly that, because that can be a bit confusing sometimes. I guess you've got something that looks like it's ready and needs to be harvested, but you don't necessarily have to lift everything depending on the veg that's in it. So how do you break that down in your mind?
Well, the first thing is harvesting things that want to be storage organs.
What do you mean by that now?
Well, I mean, obviously a salad leaf doesn't want to be cut. It's not something to be stored. So, for instance, squash, potatoes, carrots, beets, leeks to some extent, they're all onions. They're all something that the plant creates to store till the following year. So you have to get them when they're ready. So with squash, you want to leave them. We'll start with squash, as it's the flavour of the month, as it was, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then I've started harvesting the early varieties. Uchiki curry, gone in the shop, go in the boxes next week. The little orange ones, they are ready now. The vines have virtually died off. Don't be tempted to take them off too early. The longer you leave them on the plant, the better they are for riper they are, and the better they are for storing. So don't be in too much of a rush. But the uchiki curry vines had died off to nothing. Just bare stems now. And they're a good, nice orange, so they're ready to come in as an early one. Some of the later ones.
Is there any way to kind of like knocking on it with your finger? Is there anything about the kind of, like, how do you know it's ready to be harvested?
When they've reached their colour, and I do it visually. The skin looks ready, looks mature. Chef here goes around knocking on them with his knuckles like that, and does it in a very Gallic way, which is quite impressive, but doesn't work for me knocking on them. No, I just do it. If the vines have dried off, there's no more advantage in leaving them out. So I leave them out as long as possible to get a finish on them. but bring them in before there's any serious frost, which down here on the Waterford coast, we've got another week or two. We'll probably have a grass frost, possibly tonight, but nothing that will really frighten a squash. But early varieties coming in, and the later varieties next week or the week after. I'll keep my eye on the weather, and then I'll finish those off in here in the glass house. I'll put pallets down.
What would the frost do to them as a matter of interest?
Well, they're not frost hardy.
Okay.
So if they're left out for a reasonably hard frost, they'll turn to mush.
Right.
But a light, the light grass frost you get in October are fine. So they'll generally be all right for another couple of weeks. But if you're in an inland area that gets harder frost, keep your eye on the weather, and probably err on the side of caution. But bring them in somewhere nice and dry and quite warm to finish them off. And when you do harvest them, cut the vine either side of the stem. You don't cut at the stem because it can rot at that point. You leave a little section of vine on, maybe sort of 6 to 10 centimeters of vine on each one. So there's a T on each one effectively, because if you cut them at the stem, then rots can get in there quite happily. And a lot of crops are like that. You don't want to cut below what would be called the abscission layer. A plant naturally makes for a storage organ like a cut-off layer, which it keeps fungus and disease and so on out. If you cut below that, then you're allowing fungus to get in. Onions are like that. People shouldn't go around folding their onions down. That's a bizarre thing to do. You let the onion form its own layer, and that's the layer the plant wants as like a protective layer.
Okay. And when you say then you bring them into the glass house to finish them off, what's actually happening there? It's just the skin is
they're continuing to ripen. I keep saying a chicky curry because that's just the moment I was having some this morning. The early varieties are ready to use now, but some of them, Crown Prince and one we grow here, Vifta Tom, which is a huge orange one, they look lovely. They improve for the next couple of months sitting in a warm place. The flesh softens and sweetens, and they're really not at full taste till Christmas. So have a look at what variety you've grown and see when it should be available to eat, and don't go early. It'd be terrible if you ate a Crown Prince next week and it didn't have the full flavour, So eat them when they're ready, and it could be 2 or 3 months in storage needed to bring on the full flavour.
And they will store in the glass house quite happily for like 5-6 months, I guess.
They will. Occasionally we get a really hard frost that can get into the glass house. Doesn't happen every year. That wouldn't really be until January, although there was 14 years ago now, there was the winter that started in early December. And certainly they would have been destroyed then. But normally you're fine until Christmas, and you'll have eaten them by then anyway, I imagine. We will have some left, hopefully, and we will store them. Well, actually, we'll probably store them on the old racks, which were designed for such things in Curramore. Some of the old outhouses there have the beautiful old wooden racks on for storage, but not everybody has those. But then I'll bring them and stick them in the corner of your kitchen. I'm sure.
I was
More
just
artistic people than me can do a decoration, but yeah, they're very happy stored inside.
Yeah, I've had them inside in the house until I think as late as May of the following year. They do very well in the house as long as the skins
what your
are
son
cured.
Nicky tells me, you don't bother heating the house much anyway, so that will probably help. But maybe that's just his bedroom.
Yeah, well, exactly. We won't go down that road, Richard. So Mike has a question there about his potatoes. He says Sarpomira potatoes with green stalks. They look like they're still growing. They were sown in April. Should I harvest them now or leave them in the ground?
No, if you're harvesting for storage, leave them until the soil cools down, because we're talking again about a storage organ. A potato is to last 1 year to the next, and again they need to mature before the winter. and the cooling soil is what makes them mature. You can certainly harvest them to eat now. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to store them, I would leave them another couple of weeks, maybe till mid-October, when the soil's cooled down a bit and there'll be a real hard skin on them. And traditionally, what we always did for storing potatoes when I was younger was dig them and leave them out for a day or so on a non-frosty day, just to get a little bit weathered, and then to dry them off a bit and to finish the skins off a bit, sort through them, have your bag to use immediately for ones that you've caught with a fork or a bit of slug damage or whatever, and the good whole ones. Well, the best way to store them actually a traditional potato clamp, which anybody who came on our harvesting and storage class a few weeks ago would have done, how to make a clamp. That's basically you make a pile of your roots, cover them with hay or straw, then cover that with soil. But failing that, put them into potatoes. Can't go green because then they're toxic. So you need to exclude light from them. So old paper sacks are fine, or Hessian sacks in a cool shed. They should store fine for the next few months for you in that.
Yeah. What about beetroot then? So I've kind of got beetroot in the ground at the moment, and they're all kind of big enough that I am wondering, should I lift them and store them in the garage, or?
No, Mick, you're always impatient. Calm down. I guess that's why you're an entrepreneur, the impatience. But very much leave them out. I would to again let it cool off a bit because the soil is still surprisingly warm. Let it cool off, and they'll go dormant. You want them to go dormant to store them. So I'd leave them out another 2 or 3 weeks. The weather's cooling off all the time. The soil temperatures are plummeting now, hence my bubble hat coming out. And then they'll be ready to store. And if you, again, you're planning for storage, should start when you're growing, like with beetroot. The early sowings that you put in April and so on, off eating fresh in the summer. If you want to store, you need to sow later in June, late May through to late June, and they won't have gone woody and like hard on you. They'll just be a nice big beetroot to store back end of the year.
That's a really interesting point. So the ones they need that sort of cold spell at this time of the year to do well in storage.
Oh yeah, plants are always recording the weather. They have and the beetroot, what it wants to do is go into to become a storage organ and then to produce a flowering shoot in the spring. That's what it wants to do. We're going to eat it before then, but you want it to have all of its chemistry sorted out to be a storage organ. So you want it to get a little bit chilled now the next few weeks.
And then it can be stored very successfully in a box of sand or whatever.
Box of sand or box of compost, or by that I mean like potting compost. Please not peat. It's don't use peat in your gardens for anything.
Yeah.
So sand, or again you can make a clamp. They do need to be kept slightly moist. So if you're putting them in bags, don't leave them somewhere where they're going to get lots. A paper bag where the paper bag is constantly going to be dried out. By sunshine coming through a window or something. They will shrivel a bit if they get if the air is too dry around them.
Okay, so moving on to the roots then. So like thinking about carrots and parsnips, I guess you can leave in the ground pretty much.
Parsnips hate to be harvested and they'll start shriveling. I mean, I used to harvest them weekly from a market stall because even a week-old parsnip is looking a bit miserable.
Yeah.
Leave parsnips in the ground. They're not even particularly liked by slugs. So unless your ground is horribly wet and sluggy, you should be fine. So leave them there. Leeks, again, leave them in the ground. But again, if you're storing in the ground, make sure you've chosen the right variety. Some leeks are an autumn leek. They'll bulk up early, and they're usually knocked back badly by a hard frost. I grow a variety here whose name I've just forgotten, age, I think. I'll come back to you later, which takes us through to April time. It's very late bolting, and it gives us something green for the kitchen. Well, green and white, I suppose, for the kitchen in early spring. But make sure if you are intending to leave leeks out in the garden, they're the right variety for leaving over the winter.
Okay, cool. What about carrots then? So, like, there's always that tension with carrots, I think, between you can leave them in the ground, but you're inclined to get more slug damage and things like
Yeah.
that from now on.
Again, I'm repeating myself here all the time because it's something serious. Wait until the right temperature. There's the guy who grows an awful lot of the organic carrots in Ireland, Philip Draper, is at his place one day. He grows tens, if not hundreds of acres of them. And I said, have you started harvest yet of carrots? He said, no, the soil is still 12 degrees. He would obviously measure it, incredibly accurate grower. You want the soil to have cooled off before you dig them up. So again, leave them to the middle of next month, middle of October, before you dig them out when the soil's cooled off. And that will mean the carrot has made the internal chemical changes needed. It'll be less sweet, more sugar and less sugar and more starch. But that'll be a storage carrot for you.
Ah, interesting. So that I mean, I've always heard that you leave carrots in the ground till the first frost to sweeten them up.
No, that's
So that's the
parsnips.
opposite. So it's the other way around with carrots then, is it? That the frost converts the sugars to starch for storage, so they're going to be less sweet.
Well, not the frost. It's as it's making it. It's more the cold. It's not actually a frost. It's the soil going below about 10 degrees, and the carrot then is pulling all its leaves in. If it's still got vigorous foliage, it doesn't really want to be stored long term.
Yeah.
The leaves start dying down, and if you can't pull them by the leaves, then that's probably a good test that you could dig them and store them. Now, carrots really do need to be kept moist if you're storing them.
Yeah.
And the best place actually to store carrots is in a plastic bag in the cold compartment of your fridge. But if you do, failing that, in slightly moist sand in a cool shed is a good bet.
Okay. So that sounds like we've talked about this before, Richard, those kind of completely wrong gardening myths. So I've definitely read that in gardening books about leaving carrots in the ground to sweeten them up with the first frost. But you're saying that's completely wrong, basically, are you?
Well, parsnips, very much that's the case.
Okay, right.
I mean, if it gets really heavily frosted, well, like with potatoes, you will get some breakdown of starch then. But if you get to that stage, then your carrot's ruined, in my opinion. No, the sort of you're talking earlier on about making winter casseroles and veg stews and so on. That's your earthy flavour you get with a winter carrot. You get still got that sweet flavour of summer carrot. We're still putting them in the boxes or in the shop, bunched at the moment, so they're nowhere near ready enough to be stored at that.
Okay. Just a reminder to everyone then, if you wanna pop any questions you have in the chat, there's been a few there already, so please do that. So Richard, then I'm thinking about the kind of leafy things, so kale, charge, those kind of
leave them on the plant.
Just leave them alone. They're fine where they are.
I mean, I've never known a winter hard enough to take curly kale out.
Yeah.
Cavolo Nero is a bit softer, but still, I mean, our winters aren't as hard as they were. Yeah, leave them on the plant and keep harvesting. I harvest kale from sort of May, June onwards. Keep harvesting the leaves up the stem. And don't be tempted to take your kale out when you've taken all the leaves off, because next spring, February, March, April, you'll get a bonus crop of what we put on the menu here as poor man's kale, which are the little kale shoots. So even when they're nothing but a stem, leave them in and await your poor man's broccoli in the spring from them.
Huh, interesting. And what about if you needed to kind of get the bed ready for next year, though, if you wanted to be putting seaweed down or whatever? Depends on your rotation as well.
It will come out, in April, plenty of time to make a bed for anything you want, really.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, I'm not a great believer in winter digging. In fact, we're trying to we're moving increasingly to a minimum cultivation thing on the land here as we improve it. No advantage in digging in winter, and I'm looking out if I keep glancing up, I'm looking at the germinating green manure in front of me here. Have something in the land, if at all possible, something growing. So green manures can still be sown now. You can still get away with sowing things like corn salad, winter purslane, but leaving all the roots of a mature kale plant in, great. And I wouldn't be too worried about taking the weeds, so like annual meadowgrass or forget-me-nots or chickweed up from around the roots of your kale. Leave them on the ground to keep it healthy.
Yeah. So you'd be happier with a weedy bed through the winter than like if you didn't have a green manure to sow or anything, just leave the weeds alone
I would. I mean, you have to
rather
be
than clear
careful.
you.
I mean, I've lost a couple of staff here, and a member of staff, we have some weeds on the odd bed which are starting to seed, which is not particularly good. I'll have to control those next year. But if they're not doing too much seeding, leave them, and you can always trim them off, which prevents them seeding.
Yeah.
Or if you're a small garden area, trim them with shears. So that bare soil, tidy attitude over the winter is dreadful for your soil.
Yeah.
Don't perceive it as messy, see it as healthy.
Yeah. Would covering down with black plastic or cardboard be better than bare soil as well?
Better than nothing, but that's only half the job. Roots in the soil is the big one. You're
Yeah.
keeping
Okay.
the soil alive because the roots grow and are being eaten by bacteria and fungi and so on. And that's the natural cycle of your soil to keep it healthy. If you break that up, the soil deteriorates very quickly. So bare soil bad is my favorite mantra in the garden, really.
Yeah. Interesting. Also very good for lazy gardeners like me. So, I can just leave the weeds there basically instead of doing anything with them.
Well,
Dan
actually,
is
Mick, you fall for it every year when you're criticising my messy beds, and I persuade you that it's part of my overall plan.
So Dan is asking, he said, I have leaks in since March, my first time. I took one out to test it last week as it looked quite large, but when I pulled it out, it was solid throughout. How long do
Oh
they need
dear,
to be left?
that's bolting.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
You've grown an early variety, and I think you probably put it in a little bit early. And as I say, all plants are recording messages. Almost certainly after it started growing, it got a cold spell, which persuaded it that it's been through a winter, and it now thinks this is spring. So
Yeah,
it's bolting. So if they're all the same variety, and they're probably an early variety, pull them out and take what you can out of them. They're still around the hardcore. You can make a vegetable stock with a hardcore, boil it all up. But there's stuff around the hardcore you can still use, but some of them possibly haven't bolted. But dig them up and make yourself a leek and potato soup out of whatever you can get out of them now.
yeah. Very good. And Dan then is also asking, what could he put in the bed after he pulls leeks and carrots out?
You
So I
can
suppose we've
you
green.
can still manage, if you like, a sowing of a winter salad like corn salad or winter purslane. That'll grow slowly over the winter and give you something nice in the spring. Or you can put a green manure down, like annual ryegrass is what I use a lot here. I use a mixture, Fruit Hill Farm sell Landsberger mix, which is clover and ryegrass. That can go until the end of next month. And that
Yeah,
will grow slowly over the winter and keep your soil healthy.
yeah. Very good. And obviously, if you have a polytunnel, you can still go with you could still sow the other salads like
Oh
the
yeah,
green.
till the end of October, you can get away with sowing Mizuna, rocket, mustard. Um, After that, they tend to get about so high and then bolt on you. One of the trial sowings in November. But I mean, you can always give it a go. What's the worst that's going to happen?
Yeah,
But you're normally very safe sowing to October. And then you've got some lovely fresh salad leaves to eat for your Christmas dinner if you want. And then there's no real harm in having bare soil for a month or two in the tunnel because it's not getting hammered by the weather. And you can sow again in January for springtime salads. They'll grow for March for you, March, April.
okay. Adele is asking there. I think it's probably similar answer, Adele. Any suggestions for empty beds in a new school garden? to be able to harvest during the school term. So, like,
oh well, very much there. Because I should have mentioned actually to the person earlier talking about their empty beds. The big outdoor sowings, which you're getting ready for now, is the overwintered garlic and the overwintered broad beans. Two very valuable crops for us. And garlic, the sweet spot for garlic is in November, in my view. If you go much earlier than the end of October, they do a little bit. There's rain coming in now. I didn't need that from afternoon harvesting. Never mind. Can we keep this one limping on into the afternoon so I can avoid the rain? Yeah, so you've got the garlic and the broad beans. The garlic, November is the best time to get that in, and make sure that you buy planting garlic, which is autumn planting. Don't use garlic from a supermarket, as it can come from China or Spain and be adapted to a whole different climate. So you want something that's happily going to go through the Irish winter. It's completely hardy. Don't waste tunnel space on it. They actually grow better outside than in a tunnel, because in order to make a bulb with lots of cloves, they need a shot of winter on them outside. Go much earlier than the end of October, they don't grow as well. And if you go into December, they don't do as well either. Broad beans, a sweet spot for them is the last 2 weeks in October. Again, choose a variety for overwintering. Aqua Dulce is the classic variety, which I always found very, very winter hardy in all but the coldest winters. That's here in Waterford, or I live in Tipperary. Possibly if you're in the North Midlands, you might lose a few more, but that grows very, very well through the winter. So that's another way you can keep the ground covered.
yeah, it's also, I think, Richard, I always think with broad beans, when you get those green shoots coming up in, November, it's always it's kind of a lovely thing in a winter garden, that you've got some green there as well.
It is. It's. I mean, I've been doing this. Sorry, that is my vents wobbling in the wind there.
We can't hear that, by the way. We can just hear you, so you're fine.
Oh, right, that's fine then. I can barely hear myself think that with rattles. But yeah, I've been gardening.
It's lovely and warm here in the office, by the way.
Well, it's warm still in here. It's just miserable looking out. Yeah, I've been gardening many, many years, and I still get a thrill when things germinate. I think it's fantastic, as you say, seeing them popping through in November. I'd recommend people cover them over, because rooks, I find, and jackdaws take a huge interest. They don't do anything with them, they just pull them out of the ground. Because there's not many shoots appearing, they want to have a good look. So just so you don't come in one morning and find them all scattered everywhere, cover them over with a little bit of net to keep the rooks out.
Okay. And then there's a question there about pruning, which is not quite today's topic, but it's an interesting question. When's the best time to prune plum trees? I did it in June, but it's not looking great now. The leaves have holes in them.
Well, I wouldn't worry about the holes. Well, I can do a bit of upselling there, Mick. Yeah, I'm running a fruit course the end of next month.
Oh, really, Richard? Tell us more about that, dates and costs.
Oh, I will, Mick. It's great value and a good day out with a lunch as well, and biscuits and cakes in the afternoon. No, it's just a chance to look at the fruit, because people have been asking me questions about it. But yeah, plums, they're actually quite hard to do, because the tradition is to prune them in the summer to prevent fungus disease getting into the tree. And pruning in winter can lead to that, but it's quite hard to do formative pruning in the summer. Traditionally, you've got the shape in them by doing formative pruning in the winter. Then after 3 or 4 years, you switch to keeping them tidy. But they're not an easy one to manage. It's hard to explain in anything but a whole day's fruit course. Now, it's hard to explain how you go about it, but if you don't want to do much pruning, I've looked at various systems, including with plums, of leaving them to get on with it and doing no pruning whatsoever. And plums will produce a crop for you to some extent by doing that, and many apple varieties will. Some won't, some will. So if you're not happy about pruning, do nothing at all. It's better to do nothing than to do it badly.
Yeah. And Susanna has very helpfully put a link up to that fruit course in the chat there, so to check that out.
So
Eddie is
getting good at the advertising and the seeking from one section to another. Good grief.
I mean, that was absolutely flawless, Richard. I must say.
Okay, yeah, I think I can avoid the training course you're going to send me on then.
So Eddie is asking, he said his potatoes have scabs on them and also little holes. So that sounds like wireworm, is it?
Yeah, little holes are wireworm usually, and
Yeah.
bigger holes are slugs. They're still totally edible if you want to cut bits off, but they won't store. If there's holes in them, they'll tend to rot. So just cut the bits you don't like off them. And it's interesting actually that because the traditional way in Irish villages to grow them, well, prior to the potato famine and afterwards, was on a grass sod turned in. The grass sod was turned in and grown in that. And that would usually mean you'd have lots of wireworm. And I always thought, well, how did people manage it? The answer is they didn't bother and just ate them wireworm and all. I know many years ago now, I was in Central America working on farms, and the beans will be full of weevils at the end of the dry season. And they just boiled them up, weevil and all, really. So that's what would have happened. But we are fussier, and people will tend not to want to boil a whole potato and have a few wireworms to eat, so cut them out.
Yeah. And actually, I was just thinking, I think it was it Mike who asked about the potato question earlier on, the Sarpomira. It's a good advert for Sarpomira as a blight-resistant variety if he's still got nice green, healthy stalks in
Very good, yes.
in early October, right?
It wasn't the worst blight year ever, but it certainly wasn't a good year. There's plenty of rain in the summer.
Yeah.
So yeah, the only way, unless you want to spray very heavily, really, is to grow blight-resistant varieties, and they're not immune to blight; they're resistant. So in a really bad year, they'll go down, but they go down much later than everything else. And by the way, storing potatoes, if you have had blight and you want to store potatoes long term, cut the leaves off now. And leave the potatoes in the ground, both to toughen up and the blight spores in the soil surface to die, and then leave them 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then dig the potatoes out, and you'll have a hard skin coming through soil that hasn't really got any blight spores anymore. So the potatoes won't get infected as you harvest them.
Very good. Just before we finish up, Richard, a couple more quick fire harvesting tips, right? So what about cabbages? What do you do with cabbages? How do you know when they're ready, and when do you harvest them?
Right. Well, a white cabbage will store very happily over the winter. Though I remember as a child, we had a net hanging up in one of our sheds, and I sent to get one from my mother, and I went out and it was hollow when I picked it up. And a mouse had got into the cabbage and had an edible home, essentially, and eaten its way to the outside. So I think the moral of the story is to keep away from mice. I've never seen that since. But yeah, you can store them in a shed or in a fridge, and then a white cabbage will store a long time. A green cabbage won't, the conical ones. But a white cabbage will store, or a red cabbage, for quite a long time, if kept cold. But I'd leave it on the plant until it cools off, until your shed's cool, because if you harvested it now, it would be sitting in a warm shed for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. I remember being at a slow food event in Italy years ago, Richard, and they talked about pit cabbage, which I think was in the Styria region. They used to keep cabbages in pits and
yeah, I would know it as a clamp. Yes, you said, like I was saying earlier, the potato clamp or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I think this was more like a wooden pit, like a big deep well, basically around.
Oh right, yeah, they would still fine in that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think they were topped up with straw, and I don't know, was it sort of a kind of an element of fermentation about it? I can't really remember, but anyway, I just remember being struck by the name pit cabbage as being very not a brilliant brand name, but very, very interesting all the same. So yeah, that's cabbages. What else have we got that we haven't spoken about? We covered most of the onion family. We talked about, well, garlic and onions, obviously you would have in storage by now, effectively, your garlic presumably hanging up somewhere if you've stored it, and your onions the same up in braids at this point.
Yes.
What else have we not
Well, I
mentioned?
mean, you don't have to do braids. Both will store quite happily in an open, airy shed. Once you've got your onions finished, you can stack them 3 or 4 deep in a crate and keep them in an airy shed. And they don't mind a little bit of heat. They store from when they've dried off about a month ago now.
Yeah.
And they will happily store in a shed through to next February time. Then they'll want to sprout. As I say, they're a storage organ that wants to produce a flower. That's what they're there for. And if you want to keep them beyond that, put them in the bottom of the fridge, and they'll store for another month or two for you there.
Okay. So what else is there? We talked about most of the brassicas. I guess like the kind of legumes are really you're kind of talking about freezing there, aren't you, with peas and French beans and things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can grow dried beans next year because Chef is really keen on us having our own pulses. And for some reason, everybody seems to call them faba beans now. They're broad beans. Always will be to me, or tick beans are the agricultural ones for livestock. You can grow those beans and they dry off in August, September for you. We're growing some haricot vert here, which is semi-dried. In fact, just seen Nicky, my harvester, just arrived. He'll be harvesting those this afternoon. That's semi-dried, so that's freezing. But yes, you're talking freezing unless you get things to the dried form, and then dried broad beans will go through the winter very happily in a bag for you, or a jar on a shelf or something.
Brilliant. Okay, listen, we're nearly up against time. So that was a really, really interesting and hopefully very useful session for people. I want to follow Richard's lead on amazing promotion of our various different commercial activities here, and say that a couple of things to check out. Please have a listen to our podcast, which is called Food Matters. You'll get it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. The latest episode is actually about permaculture, which is very interesting. We've had Mark Diacono on recently, so do check that out. And that's really building up ahead of steam. And obviously for people based in Waterford, do pop in and see our new refill store larder. We've got some veg for sale from Curramore, and we also have our weekly veg box that you can sign up for. If you don't want to grow the stuff yourself, we can supply it to you fresh from Curramore for picking up on a Saturday morning here. So you can check that out on our website as well.
And our eggs as well.
And we have our own eggs now, yes, which is very exciting. And they're very delicious as well, Richard. And then final thing, because there was we have a school teacher there, Adele. I'm not sure if you're still there, but for anybody who's working in schools, or if you have kids in schools, let them know about Grow at School, which is our school garden education program, which schools can sign up for. And Adele, that includes lots of really good stuff around sort of, seasonally appropriate, academic year appropriate sowing and growing plans and things, and lots of brilliant lesson plans for teachers and all that. So do sign up for that. I think that's all I can think of. So have a brilliant month, everybody. Hope the growing and harvesting is fruitful, and we'll see you back in a month's time. And thanks, Richard, for your time. The rain has stopped again, so you can get stuck into the work now, the real work.
Yes, boss, I'm going straight out.
And I'm staying here in the office. So thanks a million, everyone. Have a great weekend, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.